and welcome back. Today's the fourth in a series of videos on how to weave on a floor loom, specifically for the beginner, and we're working on a scarf. If you're just joining us, you may want to subscribe to my channel. There's a playlist there where you can watch from the beginning and then catch up to us here. In this video, I want to teach you how to calculate the warp and weft, how much yarn you're going to need for this project. We're going to do it two different ways. One, we're going to sit down and actually figure it out on a piece of paper. And another way, the easy way, at the end of the video, I will show you an app that I use to calculate warp and weft. It is best for you to know how to do it, so it's important that you understand where you get the different measurements from and what you need to do to figure it out without the app, but the app makes it so much simpler and easy. So hang in there, and at the very end I'll show you the easy way to do it. But by then you'll understand exactly what you need to know to calculate how much yarn you need to create a warp and for the weft of the project. So let's get started. I'm going to take you to the computer and show you how to calculate the warp and weft. I think it'll be easier if you can see exactly what we're talking about. To calculate a weaving project, you need to decide what you want to make, the dimensions of that item, how many you want to weave on one warp. You need to decide if you want a hem or a fringe, choose the yarn or thread that you'll use, calculate the length of the warp, calculate the number of ends needed for the width, and calculate how many yards of yarn is needed for the warp and the weft. You should have a weaving project form and fill all this information in. If you want to recreate something, you have the information at your fingertips. You should make notes about the project on this form, especially if your calculations were not on point and what you would do the next time that you wove this project. I'll have this form available on my website at doloresjacobs.com, or click the link below to download the information. So we've decided to weave a scarf 60 inches long by 9 inches wide. Now we need to calculate the length of the warp. The length of the scarf is 60 inches. We also want to add fringe. The fringe will have to have enough yarn to be twisted and a knot tied at the bottom. I've decided to leave 8 inches to make the fringe on each end. In addition to this, we need to add what's called loom waist to the length of the warp. I like to leave 30 inches for loom waist. Loom waist is the portion of the warp that you cannot weave, or it's tied to the apron rod. To save some of this waist, I use part of the waist as the fringe. So this will bring our total warp length to 90 inches. Take up. There's something called take up, and that's when the warp threads travel over and under the weft threads. When the tension's left off the warp, the woven cloth will sort of shrink or take up as it relaxes. This is in addition to the shrinkage caused by wet. We need to add another 10% for take up. The same thing will occur in the weft. It's called draw in, but draw in is not as significant as the take up. So the length of our scarf is 60 inches. Shrinkage at 10% is 6 inches. Take up 10% also, 6 inches. And loom weight is 30 inches. So our total warp length comes to 102 inches. We divide that by 36 to get 2.83 yards. So each warp end is 2.83 yards long, or 102 inches long. Next, we need to calculate the number of ends that we need for the scarf. So we know the width is 9 inches. Again, we use 10% shrinkage, about an inch, draw in approximately half an inch. So the total weaving width is 10.5 inches. We multiply that by our end per inch, which we figured out based on our yarn at 12. 10.5 times 12 ends per inch is 126 total ends to make the scarf. Calculating the warp yardage for the scarf. Now we need to know the total amount of yarn that we need for this project. We multiply the length of each warp end times the total of 126 ends, and we find that we are going to need 356.5 yards for the warp yarn. The next thing we'll need to do is to determine if we have enough yarn for the project. I'm using cones of yarn that are left over from other projects, so I'm not sure exactly how much yarn is on the cone. To figure this out, I need to weigh the yarn and calculate the length based on the yards per pound. Shetland wool is 1,800 yards per pound. The weight of my yarn, including the cone, is 4 ounces. I need to deduct the empty cone weight from the total. I weighed the cone, an empty cone, and it weighs 1.25 ounces. So I subtract that from 4 ounces, and I'm left with 2.75 ounces of yarn. There are 16 ounces in a pound. Take 1,800 divided by 16, that's 112.5 yards in 1 ounce. 112.5 yards times 2.75 ounces gives me 309 ounces of yarn on the cone. We figure that I need 356 yards of warp. I need to see where I can pick up enough yardage to make this work. I'm currently short about 50 yards of yarn. You'll find that there are always things like this that pop up when you're weaving, and you need to know how to adapt to make things work. I need to reduce my warp by 50 yards. From experience, I know I can cut down the loom waist and shorten the fringe a little bit. I'm going to use 2.44 yards or 88 inches for the length of the warp. Considering the pattern of the draft, we need to consider the pattern of the draft that we choose to use and how it will look at the edge of the scarf. Here's 2 examples. If you look at the picture on the left, you can see how the pattern is cut off in a strange area, where the one on the right is more balanced. Although this pattern is small and you probably would not notice where the pattern ends on the edge, this is something you should think about and plan for. See how the one on the right is balanced and the diamond shape has the half of a diamond on the edge of the scarf? Sometimes we need to add or subtract warp ends to make this happen. Now I'm going to tell you the easy way to calculate. Since you have a basic understanding of how to calculate a warp and weft, I'll show you the easy way to do it. And as the saying goes, there's an app for that. My favorite app for weaving is iWeaveit by Canyon Art. I use my iPad frequently because I can bring it to the loom. They also offer software programs for PC, Android, and Mac usage. We'll take a look at the program to show you how to calculate a warp within the program, and then in the next video I want to show you how to use it to learn how to read a draft. Let's go over to the website and take a look at how to use iWeaveit. I'm here on my iPad. I've pulled up the program called iWeaveit. iWeaveit is available for iPads, Androids, or Mac, or also PC. Since I use my iPad when I'm threading the loom, I can bring it right to my loom and get the information right off this app. If you look in the right-hand corner here, by the way, this is the draft that we'll be using for our project. I don't want to speak about that right now. That'll be our next video in how to read a draft and how to plan and what all these different rows and columns and circles all mean. So we'll save that for the next video. Today I want to discuss how to calculate your warp and weft right on this program. It's very easy. So we come up here to the right. If you see this little icon here with a ball of yarn, and a calculator. We're going to click on that and open up a project sheet similar to the project sheet we just looked at. The first item that you need to fill in is the set. This is for the warp. That's determined by the yarn that you're using. And we've determined that the set on the yarn, the Shetland yarn that we're using, or if you get the cotton yarn I suggested, it's also 12 ends per inch. So we've put 12 right here. The next thing, this PPI, means picks per inch. It's similar to the set. However, this is the weft. It's determined by how hard you beat the thread in. So it should be a balanced weave. The set should be the same as the picks per inch. That would also be 12. Next, we look at the waist length, or the loom waist. I like to use 30 inches. That gives me plenty of space to sample. Sometimes you want to try a little bit of a different weave using the same tie-up that you have. As a beginner, you're going to use more loom waist than as you get more experienced. Next item is shrinkage. We talked about that before, and shrinkage is 10%. In this setup, there is no indication for the take-up. We could just change shrinkage to 20%, and that would entail both the shrinkage and the take-up. Since I'm using 30 inches for loom waist, I'm just going to leave that and leave that at 10%. Next, we have a selection whether we want to use the finished size or the size on the loom. We're going to use finished size. I turn that on. The finished width we want to be 9 inches. So I put 9 inches there. And the finished length is going to be 60 inches, which is 1.2 yards. I'm not sure why they use yards here instead of inches. It'd be easier if we could just put inches in and then calculate yards later, but you need to figure out how many inches you want and then just change that into yards. Then if we click on this button again, we're able to see how wide this project will be on the loom. Based on these calculations, it's 10 inches and the total length on the loom is 2.2 yards. Another thing that it lets us do is to choose whether we're doing a balanced weave, a warp faced, or weft face. As a beginner, most of your projects are going to be balanced, so I don't want to speak about these two items yet, but there are different types of drafts that you would need to use this to calculate your warp. The next item is the yarns and the colors and the type. What this does, rather than having a work form that you're writing all the information in, this will save all the information right in your computer or iPad. You can also print this out so that you have a physical sheet showing you what you did and what you used. So we can come up here where it says unspecified, yarn 1, and we're going to put in warp, and I'm using the Shetland wool, so I'm just going to put in Shetland because I know that is a wool. And we've calculated the set to be 12 ends per inch. I've also been able to select the color. I'm going to use a gold color for the warp and a brown color for the weft. Here's another portion that you really don't need to know right now. If you leave it default, I'm using the same kind of yarn for both the warp and the weft. So leaving them the same is going to give me that balanced fabric that I want. Again, for the weft, we're going to choose yarn 2. I'm just going to write in weft. And come down to the type, and that is Shetland again. And the set is 12. So we're finished with that. The next category is notes. In notes, I like to put where I got the pattern from. This was from Ann Dixon's book, page number 83. I changed the treadling on this. So you can make whatever notes that you want right in this category here. You can go back and also make notes as to how your project turned out, whether you enjoyed this pattern, what you would change in your next weaving on it. This is where you would keep those kind of notes. The next item is if you're not sure of the set that you want to use. So you have a yarn that You have no idea what the set should be. What you can do is enter either the yards per pound, which on the wool is 1,800, or we can also use the wraps per inch. So to find our set, we used the wraps per inch, which was 24. It then lets you select the type of cloth, whether you are weaving upholstery, a medium weight, woolen, lightweight, delicate. For me, it's calculating the set really high when I use a woolen. 15 ends per inch I think is a little too tight. So I'm going to push it to the lightweight clothing, which they're giving us a 13 recommended set. We're going to be using 12. So it's a way to calculate this, but we've calculated it other ways. The next calculation is to show the yarn calculation. I named this project Rose Path. That is what this particular design is called. And I added my design because I changed it. We're using a 4-shaft draft. So I put in 4 here. The warps, it's telling me 1 repeat of warp is 126 ends. The treadles on the loom are 6. The weft in 1 repeat, it's calculated at 30. We put in the set at 12 for both the set and the picks per inch. Loom waist 30, shrinkage 10, length on the loom 2.22 yards, width on the loom 10 inches, and then the finish length is 1.25 yards, and the width for finished is 9 inches. So it's just a compilation of all the information we put in. It's telling us that for the warp, we're going to need 267 yards. For the weft, we're going to need 167. In general, the weft is about half of your warp. That's a good rule of thumb to figure out about how much weft. It's actually calculating that a little bit longer. It's telling us here that the pick count, how many times you're going to throw the warp or the weft thread across the warp, is 600 times. It's really not important to know this information, just something there to know. Let's go down to warp color table. It's telling us that the warp thread count for 1 repeat of threading, which is the total width, is 126 ends. The heddle count. That becomes important when we go to put it on the loom. There are 4 shafts on our loom, and it's telling us on shaft 1, we're going to be using 30 heddles, shaft 2, 30, 330, 430. That's because we have pattern that's very balanced. This we'll use when we go to thread the loom. It's telling us we need total heddles of 120. Then the last item here is the default settings. This is something, if you're using metric, you can turn the metric switch on. Waist length, I used 30. If you fill this in, it will automatically add this each time you put information in. The number of shafts are 8 and the number of treadles. I'm sorry, we're actually going to change that. We're only going to use 4 shafts and 6 treadles. It will save that information and have it available each time you come back to create a project. Let's just go back, and also up here in the right hand corner, it will give us a print option. When I finished calculating the warp, I like to print it, and it will print the draft. It will print, if I wanted to print the calculations, I would need to go to the calculation and then print from here. This is all we really need to know to be able to take this information and measure out a warp and put it onto the loom. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it informative. If you have any questions, just leave a comment down below the video there. I have links at the bottom for different sources for tools and supplies for weaving. And I've also left my webpage, DoloresJacobs.com, where you will be able to pull up a calculation form. And in addition to that, I have a spreadsheet that will also calculate the work for you. So if you don't have the apps to use, all you have to do is click the link below. It will download the spreadsheet, and you'll be able to input the information and it'll automatically calculate the warp and weft for you. In the next video, we're going to talk about how to read a draft. A draft is the pattern that's used for weaving. And again, I'm going to use the same app that I was using earlier. I think that'll be an easy way to show you exactly what happens and when you change things, what can be created. I hope to see you then. If you haven't done so, subscribe to my channel. There's a little bell next to that subscription button. If you click that, it'll give you notices when the next video is up. Hope to see you then. Bye.